You're listening to Coog Radio. Listen live online at coogradio.org.
Welcome everyone to the inaugural episode of Sports Takes with Dom with Coog Radio. In my show, I'll pretty much be talking about NFL, the NBA, lots of UFC, and some college sports, including Wazoo sports. Today I'm talking about some of the sporting events taking place this upcoming weekend. This includes UFC 285 and the sold-out O2 Arena in London, England, and the first 4 days of March Madness and some of my bracketology to break it down. UFC 285 is being headlined by the current champion of welterweight Leon Rocky Edwards and former champion Kamaru Usman. So this is a pretty deep card. It has 15 fights, including 6 early prelims at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 4 prelims to fights at noon, and the main card will be the traditional 5-fight lineup at 2 p.m. I'm going to talk about every fight, break it down, and give you guys a prediction. So starting off, I'm really excited about this female fight. It's between Juliana Miller and Veronica Hardy. So Juliana is coming off the Ultimate Fighter Season 30 finale where she won the show for Juliana Peña's team. I'm very excited about her because this is my first time watching the Ultimate Fighter show live, and she was the first female champion that I've been able to watch on there, so that was really cool. And this is her first official debut in the UFC. She holds a 3-1 record, so she's still pretty new to the sport. And she holds an official 1-0 record in the UFC already because of her Season 30 finale. But this is her really official debut. And she's 26 years old, and she's 5'7" with a 66-inch reach. So for the 125-pound division, she's pretty tall, pretty lanky, and she has fantastic grappling. All of her wins come by submission. So I think she'll be a huge submission threat on the mat in this fight. Veronica Hardy, she's 6-4-1, that one being a draw. She's 1-4 in the UFC, so I don't think she's very much UFC caliber. She's been in the UFC since 2016, so she's a vet at least. She hasn't fought in the last 3 years, however, and she's only 27 years old, and she's 5'4" with a 64-inch reach. She also has good grappling, but I just don't think it's on the same level as Juliana Miller, and it's not UFC caliber. So pretty much how I see this fight playing out is that it's a layup fight for Juliana, who's been very active, having 3 fights in the Ultimate Fighter show in less than 4 months. And Hardy's coming off a long layoff, which never really plays well in the sport. Hardy's low level, and I don't see her being in the UFC much longer, especially if she loses this fight. So I see Juliana keep improving like she has in his last 2 fights, and I think she's going to dominate on the ground. I likely see Miller winning this by, let's say, second-round submission or a decision. And coming up next on the card, we have a lightweight 155-pound fight between Jai Herbert and Ludovic Klein. So Jai Herbert's a very active fighter. I think this is his 5th fight, in the last 21 months. So he's coming out with a decision win over Kyle Nelson. So Jai Herbert's 12-4. He's 2-3 in the UFC, but I think his record's a little misleading because he has a TKO loss to Francisco Trinaldo and Ilia Topuria, who are all either ranked or borderline ranked, and he's been submitted by Renato Moicano. So I think you can't really knock him for those 3 losses. I think kind of compare here, if he's in the similar boat as Paddy Pimblett, but Paddy Pimblett came into the UFC and got 3 very easy fights and 3 very easy wins, versus Jai got kind of thrown into the trenches. And I think Paddy Pimblett would have lost to the same fighters. So Jai's on the same level as Paddy. He just got harder fights to start off in the UFC. So Ludovic Klein, he's come out with a decision win over Mason Jones. He was a heavy underdog over Mason Jones. Mason Jones is also a heavy contender from the UK. So Ludovic is 19-4, and he's 3-2 in the UFC, but he's faced much less skilled opponents and much smaller opponents at the 145-pound division. This is Ludovic's first fight coming up to 185 pounds, so it's going to be a little bit of a jump. Ludovic's 28 years old, and he's 5'9" with a 72-inch reach. I think this will be a pretty competitive fight, and both guys have high finish rates, so I think it'll probably be a barn burner. I think both guys will play it safe, though, because they've both been finished in the UFC, and they both are kind of close to maybe losing and getting bumped out of the UFC. So my prediction is this fight somehow goes to a decision. Both fighters play it smart. But I do hope Herbert wins, though, for the UK home crowd. And then moving up the card, we have Joanne Wood taking on Luala and Carolina. Now, I don't think this is a very high-level fight whatsoever. This is the type of fight I call a bathroom break. So Wood is 15-8, and she's 7-8 in the UFC, kind of an ugly record. But I mean, most of her losses have come in the UFC. So she's coming out 3 straight losses. However, those losses are all the top 5 contenders, and Amanda Grasso, Santos, and Lauren Murphy. And she's been in the UFC since 2014 when women first got allowed in the UFC, so that's kind of a big deal. But she is aging and she's definitely declining. She's 37 years old and she's 5'6" with a 65-inch reach. Carolina, she's still a little bit new to the UFC. She's 8-3 and 3-2 in the UFC, but she's coming off a brutal knockout loss to Molly Meatball McCann, and it was in London last year around the same time. Carolina's 29 years old and she's also 5'6", but has a 69-inch reach, so she'll have a little bit of a reach advantage in this fight, but I don't think she'll be able to use that reach advantage. I think these fighters are both pretty low level, but I think Wood's definitely the way better grappler, and she has way more submissions on her resume. So I don't think Carolina has a ground game at all to be able to compete with that. I think Wood's only lost the best, considering I talked about how she's only lost at 3 of the top 5. So I think she's gonna get takedowns. I see her dominating on the mat. I'm gonna go with Joanne Wood win by decision. Moving up on the card, I have Jake Hadley and Malcolm Gordon fighting at flyweight in the 125-pound division. Hadley is 9-1 and 1-1 in the UFC, coming off a second round submission over Carlos Candelario. Now, the nice thing about Hadley is he's very young. He's only 26 years old. And he's 5'7" with a 68-inch reach, which is pretty lengthy for the division. And he's a former Cage Warriors champ. For those that aren't familiar with Cage Warriors, it's sort of like a lower level promotion in the UK. So it's kind of like a feeder to the UFC. Guys tend to dominate in that when they're young. And then when they get good enough to compete in the UFC, they move over across the seas. So he's a former Cage Warriors champ, and he's a very well-rounded fighter. I love his boxing. He's great on the mat. He has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, so he's impressive all around. I see this fight being competitive, but I think Hadley's just levels above because I think his one loss in his debut, you can't really knock him for that. Alon Nascimento was his loss, and he only lost by decision, and Nascimento's proved to be pretty good since he got submission win since that win. I think Hadley's only loss is kind of a fluke in the UFC, and it was his debut, so he had a little bit of those debut jitters. So similar to Juliana Miller, I think this is kind of a layup fight for Hadley. And I think with Gordon's history being stopped, because he's been stopped in all 6 of his losses, coming back 4 knockouts and 2 submissions, and Gordon's 2-3 in the UFC, and he's coming off that submission to Muhammad Mokaev. I don't see Gordon winning this fight. I see Hadley taking this to the mat or winning on the feet. I see him getting a finish probably. Yeah, I like to see Hadley getting a second round submission. I think he'll get a couple takedowns and then he'll submit Gordon. Now, moving up about the card is the final early prelim. And I'm really excited about this fight. It's probably my favorite early prelim. It's between Christian Leroy Duncan and Dusko Todorovic. I think I said that right, Todorovic. Sorry about these foreign name guys. But Duncan, he's also a former Cage Warriors champ, coming right off his Cage Warriors title defense. And he's 7-0, and he's making his debut at home in London. I'm really excited about Christian Leroy Duncan because I don't watch a lot of promotions outside of the UFC, but Duncan's been so exciting to watch in Cage Warriors, to where I've actually seen his name on headlines, and I've actually been able to watch him before the UFC. So I'm pretty psyched about Duncan just because I've never had a fighter quite like him where I'm so engaged with him before he's actually ever even fought in the UFC. And he's a dangerous kickboxer, and he's only 27. He's 6'2", but he has a non-listed reach, but from the times I've watched him, I can definitely tell he has a reach advantage over most of his opponents in the 185-pound division. Like I said, he's a dangerous kickboxer. He also has an impressive amateur career where he has over 20 wins, which I think is impressive because he got some of his losses out of the way, and now he's 7-0 as an actual pro fighter. Todorovic is a little sketchy. He's 12-3, but he's 3-3 in the UFC with all his losses come by knockout, but his 3 wins all come by knockout as well. So he's definitely like a kill or be killed type fighter. He's coming off with the win over Jordan Wright, but everyone knocks out Jordan Wright, so I don't give him too much props for that. He's 28 years old, and he's 6'1" with a 74-inch reach. And because he's been knocked out twice in his last 5 fights, I think he has a questionable chin, and I could totally see him getting knocked out again in this fight. I think it's kind of made it for that. Duncan does have a little bit of a questionable takedown defense, and because Todorovic has a wrestling background, I could see Todorovic being smart, taking Duncan down to the mats and trying to grind out a decision win. But if Duncan's able to have good takedown defense, keep it on the feet, Duncan's going to dominate in the kickboxing. And because Dusko's 3 wins are all over guys who are normally in the UFC, I don't think Dusko's is necessarily UFC caliber. He's just beating guys who are the lowest level in this division weight class. I think Duncan's definitely a future top 15 contender. So he arguably could probably beat all the guys who beat Dusko. So I gotta go with Duncan here over a knockout over Dusko Todorovic. And now moving up to the noon prelims, this is probably the better 4 prelims. We have Lerone Murphy taking on Gabriel Santos. Murphy has a really interesting background. He's 11-0-1 with that one being a draw. And he's 3-0-1 in the UFC with 2 knockouts. But he's coming off a 1.5 year absence, which is huge. He got on a biking accident and almost died. So that was huge. It was outside of the sport. But he's making his long layoff return. And he's 31 years old, 5'9", with a 73-inch reach. He's primarily a kickboxer with very little ground game. All of his finish wins come by knockout. He has 0 submissions in MMA total. He has very questionable takedown defense, and his draw, pretty much the reason why he drew that fight was because he just had 0 takedown defense. He was great on the feet, but he was losing rounds because he just couldn't get back up. So Santos, he is a short notice replacement. Lerone Murphy was originally supposed to fight someone else. So Santos is a 10-0, so he's also undefeated. And he is the current LFA champ. LFA is also like a lower level regional promotion, but they run it out of the US, not the UK, like Cage Warriors. So he's the current LFA champ, and he's making a short notice fight so he can have his UFC debut. And he's 26 years old, 5'9", with a 71-inch reach. And there's not a lot of film on him because he has a very low-level regional background in Brazil. So yeah, not a lot of film on him, so he's really hard to critique. I see this fight as a step down from Murphy because he's had, he's 3-0-1 in the UFC. He's had his UFC fights. He should get a knockout for his home crowd because he is also from the UK. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but most of these fighters in every fight, one of them's going to be from the UK because the UFC tries to do this. They like to give their UK fighters, I don't want to say easy fights, but fights that are winnable for them when they're at home because they like to give the home crowd in London, like what they want to see, and they want to see their fighters win. So I think this is a layup fight also for Murphy. I think Murphy has crazy power. He has crazy knockout power. He has one punch power. I could see him cracking Santos' chin maybe in the first round. And Murphy's also just a little above, and this is a good return fight for him. It's short notice versus a guy who hasn't fought in the UFC. Santos could be a little dangerous on the mats, just considering he has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background, but I just see Murphy cracking his chin at some point and getting the knockout. Now moving up the prelims, we have a flyweight 125-pound fight between Muhammad Makayev and Jafel Filho. Makayev's a really exciting prospect. He's 8-0. He's 3-0 in the UFC and has 2 submissions, 1 decision win. And he's coming off a 3rd round submission over Malcolm Gordon. Now, Makayev, he's only 22 years old, and the exciting thing about him is that he could eventually break the youngest UFC champion record of John Jones. I believe John Jones was 23, probably about 23 and a half, and he won it in 2011. So Makayev has a whole nother year to potentially break the record. He has to win a couple more fights, though, to get a title fight. And yeah, he could be the youngest champ of all time. And this, I think the reason he could be the youngest champ ever is because it's his 4th fight in, I want to say 11 or 12 months, which is extremely active, probably double the amount you even need to remain active in the UFC. You probably only need 2 a year, and he has 4, so he's well on his way to be in the title contention. And his opponent, Filho, so he's 14-2. He's also debuting in the UFC, and he's coming off the Dana White Contender Series win. But I think the thing about Filho is that he was losing the fight in the 1st, 2nd round on the scorecards until the 3rd round where he got the knockout. So he probably would have lost that fight if it wasn't for I wouldn't say lucky knockout, but the guy just got tired at the end. So he was losing that fight, which I think is something to note. And he's 29 years old, 5'7", with a 68-inch reach. Now, I think Muhammad's just a world-class grappler. The fact that his peak would probably be the youngest champ ever, this is going to be easy for him. He's going to make easy work of this. The fact that nobody will fight Makayev ahead in the rankings because people are kind of scared of him. He's kind of the boogeyman of the division. I see this as a major step down for him, so I'm going to go with the Makayev submission in the 2nd or 3rd round. Now moving up to the 3rd to last prelim, we have a lightweight 155-pound fight between Sam Patterson and, let's see how we pronounce this, Yanao Ajmaz. We'll go with that. So Patterson is 10-1-1, that one being a draw. He's come off an impressive Dana White Contender Series win, and I think it was pretty impressive because he uses his length not just in the not just in the kickboxing, but he also uses it in the grappling. It's just scary how many submission threats he presents just because of his 6'3" length. I think him being 6'3", yeah, he's ties Jalen Turner, Ignacio Bajo Mendez, and probably Joel Alvarez as the tallest in the 155-pound division. So, I mean, 6'3" is huge for 155 pounds. So, yeah, I just think him being at 26 with a huge reach, being 6'3", he'll have a huge advantage in this fight. Ajmaz only is 6-0, so he has a very minimal background. He's taking the fight on short notice so he can enter the UFC. A lot of times when you take fights on short notice, you get your UFC contract. I think the exciting thing about him is that he could be the second active Israeli fighter. So that's pretty cool. There's only one active Israeli fighter in the UFC right now. So Ajmaz is 27 years old, 5'9", and he has no reach listed. And I can't tell you guys about his reach because there's not a lot of background on him, with him being only 6-0 in lower level promotions. So I see this fight being just a weird. I don't know why this fight's is high up on the card. It's kind of low level guys, maybe guys who aren't really UFC caliber. I don't see anyone having much power in this fight because both are debuting and they're gonna play it pretty smart. May have some jitters, may not have a lot of strikes landed in the first round. I think with just low experience. I think this fight goes to the scorecards. I don't know who's gonna win because they both have such little experience. I think Patterson wins, but I'm not sure why he's such a big favorite. I think this is closer than what people are saying. So yeah, I'm gonna go. This fight goes to the decision. I don't know who's gonna win this fight. I think it's just too low level to be able to tell. I do think we will know like who belongs in the UFC after this fight, though. It could be a really impressive outing. So next fight, we have a lightweight 155-pound fight between Chris Duncan and Omar Morales. So we have two Chris Duncans on this card, so don't get that mixed up. We have a Christian Leroy Duncan and Chris Duncan. Chris Duncan's going to be later on the prelims. And yeah, so Duncan's also coming off the Dana White Contender Series where he's 9-1. And it was a second chance on the Contender Series as well where he got knocked out in his first outing. So he's 29 years old, 5'10", has a 71-inch reach. And the big thing with Duncan is that he battles adversity well, but how long will that last him? Pretty much he enters firefights and he thrives off of guys pretty much hurting him. And then when he's almost playing possum, he's able to knock them out. But I think after so many fights, you're going to get hurt. You're not going to be able to hurt them back. So I just think he could struggle in this fight if he does get cracked early. And then Omar Morales, he's 11-3. He's 4-3 in the UFC. And he's come off 2 straight finished losses, which is kind of ugly. I think he started off 3-0 in the UFC. Yeah, he also is a Dana White Contender Series alum. He started off 3-0 in the UFC, but he's lost 3 or 4 since then. So he's probably on the verge of actually getting cut from the UFC if he loses this fight. And he's 37 years old, so he's declining. He's 5'11" with a 74-inch reach. This is a really weird matchup. I think both guys have bad striking defense, and pretty much to break it down, it's a guy with horrible striking defense versus a 37-year-old with their horrible striking defense. I don't know why this fight's even this high on the prelims. I think I've broken down 8 fights before this, and there's probably 6 or 7 fights I think that are better than it. So I don't know. This is probably the worst fight on the card. I don't know why it's high on the card. So these guys are both sketchy, and I don't know who's gonna win this fight again. Kind of like the Patterson fight last fight. So I predict this fight ends inside the distance. Someone's getting knocked out. I think these guys you can't trust them, and I think they both have just such bad striking defense that one of them's getting flatlined here. And moving up to the final prelim. This is probably my most highly anticipated prelim just because of Jack Shore. So Jack Shore, this is his first fight at the featherweight division, and he's fighting Makwan Amirkhani. Makwan is coming off his a long layoff. So Shore's really impressive. He's 16-1, but he's come off his very first career loss, and he was submitted by Ricky Simone. Shout out to Ricky Simone. He's from Vancouver, Washington, top 10 bantamweight. But yeah, he handed Jack Shore his first career loss. So Jack Shore is 28 years old, so still very young, and he's 5'8" with a 71-inch reach. So Shore's 5-1 in the UFC. He's 5-0 before that last loss. And this is his first time moving up to this weight division. So he always fought at 135, but I think because he was tired of doing the weight cuts, he's moving up to 145 for a little bit better cardio and has some more power potentially. I'm really excited about Shore because before his last fight, he was 16-0, and that's a really impressive record. I think he's probably a top 5 prospect in all of Europe, like regardless of weight class. That's just my opinion, though. And then Makwan, who he's fighting, is 17-8 with a pretty ugly 7-6 record in the UFC. And he's really, unfortunately, he's 1-4 in his last fight. That's not a good record. He's very much declining. He's come off the knockout loss to Jonathan Pierce. I will say though, Jonathan Pierce is rising up the rankings, so it's not a terrible loss. Though a knockout loss is never great. The Mach 1's 34 years old. He's 5'10 with a 72-inch reach. So Mach 1's a very one-dimensional fighter. He has no boxing threat, but he's very dangerous in the submission game when it's early. So I think Mach 1's only path to victory in this fight, I would say, is probably a submission early. I would say maybe like a submission in the first round. But Shore's really well rounded, and his most impressive part of his game is his grappling. He has 12 submissions, so I don't see Mach 1 submitting Shore in the strongest part of his game. So I expect Shore to dominate kind of wherever this fight goes, whether it's on the feet or on the ground. And Shore will definitely benefit from less of a weight cut, so I think it'll help with his cardio later in the fight, where he can maybe get like a late round submission, or it'll also help with the strength. I'm going with let's go with a third round knockout by Shore. I just think Mach 1 he'll come out early, trying to maybe get a takedown and pose his threat. I just think as the fight goes on, Mach 1 is not as effective in the later rounds. He's what I call a one-round fighter, and if he doesn't get that submission or finish in the first round, he kind of fades off just because his cardio is not really there. And because Shore has thrived off of good cardio in the past, and the fact that his cardio will actually even improve because he's going to be heavier than he was in the past, he should dominate this fight everywhere. So yeah, I'm going with the Jack Shore third round knockout. And then we're moving on to the main card, the pay-per-view at 2 p.m. So we're going to kick this off with the middleweight fight, 185-pound between number 4 in the world, Marvin Torrey, versus number 9, Roman Dolidze. So I think this is a really highly anticipated fight. And I think a lot of people are on the underdog this week, but I'm not really sold on Dolidze, honestly, because he's come out of 3 straight wins when he was the underdog, and eventually that luck's going to end. I wouldn't say luck, but he has had some fluke wins, I would say. So we'll start with Vettori's. So Vettori's 18-6-1, that one being a draw. He's 8-4 in the UFC, and he's a former title challenger where he lost to Israel Adesanya, and he's come off the decision loss to Robert Whittaker. Vettori's only 29 years old, so the fact that he's fought the best of the best and he's only 29 and hasn't really entered his prime technically, he actually could keep improving. I mean, it's pretty impressive. So he's 6 foot with a 74-inch reach. He's a little bit undersized for the division, but he's just so tough, and I swear his head's probably made of cement. The Italian dream, he's never been finished in his career, never been submitted, never been knocked out. And like I said, he's fought the best of the best, and he's been knocked down, but I swear his head's made of cement. He does not get finished. It's crazy. Eventually, it probably will catch up with him though. But he's just so well rounded. He has crazy pace. He hasn't wore down late in the fight. And yeah, he never really seems to wear down, I guess. He's kind of like the Max Holloway of the 185-pound division. The Roman Dolidze, on the other hand, he's only 12-1. That one loss coming in the UFC, so he's 6-1 in the UFC. And he's coming off 4 straight wins. And I've watched his last 3 fights, and they're 3 straight knockout wins as an underdog, which is really impressive. He was a dog versus Kyle Dawkins, Phil Haas, and his last fight was Jack Hermanson. So he's a 34-year-old Georgian. He's 6'2" with a 76-inch reach. Pretty much he's a Georgian grappler. That Georgian grappling has proven to be so effective the last couple of years. When you look at like Ilia Topuria too. So he's learning how to dominate on his feet as well. I'd say in his last 3 fights, he's come off 3 straight knockouts. He's very much learned how to use his grappling to influence the kickboxing game as well. Kind of like in his last fight. I swear, every time he fights, I just get more and more shocked that he actually won. So he was a massive underdog versus Kyle Dawkins, came in, knee him in the face, and got a first round knockout. I was so shocked by that. Came in versus Phil Haas, and Phil Haas is a beast, and I've always been very fond of Phil Haas. And pretty much this fight was when he started using the grappling to influence the kickboxing. So it was so nasty. He tore Phil Haas's knee apart on the ground, and I still don't know how the ref, Dan Margliotta, I don't know why he didn't stop the fight. Pretty much, if you tear your knee, if you have a massive injury in a fight and you're looking at the ref and everyone's looking at the ref like you need to stop the fight, I don't know why you don't stop the fight. But then Dolidze went on to fight Haas for the rest of the first round, pretty much with Haas on one leg, and got the knockout. So I don't praise Dolidze that much for that. I mean, he did tear his knee on the ground, so that's an impressive grappling feature. But the fact you're knocking out some guy who has one knee and is hobbling around like a chicken, I think that's kind of a fluke win in a way. So yeah, and then his last fight, Dolidze was fighting Jack Hermanson. Hermanson was winning the first half of the fight. He was kickboxing him from range on the feet. He was just point fighting him. He was outstriking him, and he was avoiding takedowns. And then Delize kind of got like a lucky scramble and ended up on his back and got Hermansson to this very rare calf slicer submission type angle on the ground. And pretty much Hermansson was defenseless. And it was one of those moments where Hermansson's not necessarily getting knocked out, but if you're defenseless and can't defend yourself on the ground, the ref's going to stop the fight. So again, Delize won that fight, but he was losing most of the fight, and it was a very fluke move by both fighters to where I would say 99% of the time that fight ends in a decision, and Hermansson probably wins that fight and exposes Delize's stand-up game. But then it ended up being a Delize weird knockout on the ground. So again, I think his last 2 wins are kind of weird submissions, or they're weird flukes. So I think Vettori is just better on the feet here, even though he doesn't have sheer knockout power. I think he'll just win on the feet and try to keep it on the feet as much as he can. I think Vettori has better IQ than Delize's last 2 fighters, so I don't think he'll get baited into grappling exchanges like Hermansson and Haas. I just think he's way smarter, and that's why he's on top of the world. Or sorry, not on top of the world, but he's top 5, so he's a very smart fighter. I just think Delize's last 2 wins they've been flukes, and I think Vettori's light years ahead of the last 2 fighters. I think Vettori is just better on the feet and he's gonna keep it there. And I don't think Vettori will try to go to the ground at all. I mean, I know he's a good wrestler, but he'd be smart to keep Delize on the feet and just dominate on the feet and go to an easy decision. And I also don't see Delize finishing. I don't see Delize finishing Vettori just because no one's ever finished Vettori, and Vettori's fought guys who are way better than Delize, just guys who are champions of the world. And moving on to the second main card, we have a flyweight women's fight for 125 pounds between number 8 Jennifer Maia and number 12 Casey O'Neill. So Maia is a veteran of the sport. She's so impressive. She's 29-1 draw, and she is 5-5 in the UFC. That 5-5 is kind of a weird record because she's only fought the best of the best, pretty much. And she's also a former title challenger versus Valentina Shevchenko. So the only unfortunate part of her game is that she's definitely declining. She's 34 years old, and she's only 5'4" with a 64-inch reach. So she's come up with a massive upset over Marina Moroz. So I think most of her fights go to a decision, so I'll probably guess this fight goes to a decision as well. And then Casey O'Neill, on the other hand, she's 9-0, so she's an undefeated prospect, which is pretty impressive in the women's divisions. And she's 3-0 in the UFC with a submission and knockout, so she is capable of finishing fights. I think the big thing here is that she's come off of only the split decision win versus Roxanne Modafferi. And sorry, Roxanne was in her retirement fight of that fight. She retired at the end of that fight, and I think her record was like 25-21. So I think to be a 9-0 prospect and you're retiring a fighter and has 21 losses and you're only winning by split decision, I mean, you weren't winning on one of the judges' scorecards. I think that's kind of a concern. But I mean, she's only 25 years old, so I think she has plenty of time to improve. I just don't know if she's there yet. I think she's definitely getting kind of skyrocketed to the top of the division way too fast, especially with only 3 fights in the UFC. But yeah, she's 25 years old and she's 5'6" with a 69-inch reach. And how I see this fight playing out, I don't think O'Neill has any impressive wins, and she's getting raised to the division, like I said. This fight will be competitive. I could see it easily being a decision, maybe a split decision where the judges can agree on who won. But similar to the last fight, I see Maia pulling the upset, winning on her feet, maybe getting takedowns for ground control like she's done in the last couple fights. And I just see O'Neill. I think O'Neill's just way overhyped. Maybe in a couple of years she could be a future title challenger, but right now I just think she's not near the top of the division, especially coming off a split decision win versus someone who's retired now. And moving on to the third to last fight, the feature bout between Gunnar Nelson and Brian Barberwiener for a welterweight fight at 170. Now, Gunnar's really impressive. He has a great background where he's 18-5-1, that one being a draw. He's 9-5 in the UFC, which is a pretty impressive record in the UFC, having nearly double the amount of wins as losses. And he's come off an excellent dominant decision win over Takashi Sato. So the big thing here, though, is that Gunnar's a huge favorite, but I think people forget that his last fight, that was a year ago now, that seems like it was more recent. But yeah, he hasn't fought for a year. But before his fight a year ago, he had a 2.5-year layoff. So you're saying one fight in the last 3.5 years. I think that's a huge stretch, even though he's a huge favorite here. And yeah, he's 34 years old. So he lost pretty much 3.5 years in his prime. I think that's so valuable. So he's 5'11" with a 72-inch reach. And his only losses are to ranked fighters. And so I think you can't really knock him for his 5 losses. Like he's lost like Leon Edwards, Vicente Luque, guys who were, top 10. And he's primarily a grappler. He's not really a striker. Most of his wins are coming by submission or wrestling on the ground. And Barberena's the complete opposite. I feel so bad for Barberena why they gave him this matchup because he's come off the submission loss to Rafael dos Anjos, the former champ. I don't know what they're doing with Barberena here. I feel like they should give another striker to have like a nice, like I call it, a bar burner type of fight. He has no wrestling in his back pocket. He's just purely a striker, kind of dirty boxer, and he's 9-7 UFC. So I think you give him someone that he can, I don't know, someone he can strike with for 3 rounds. I don't think you should give him a grappler because then it's just going to lead to a boring fight. Especially being 33, his prime's coming to an end. And I think you should give him a good striker for an exciting fight versus someone who's going to out grapple him when Brian has no grappling ability. And Brian's 6 foot with a 72-inch reach. Brian's really exciting to watch too because he has rapid hands. I don't think I've ever seen quite the output that he does. He's like a Nate Diaz type guy where, you're seeing like 20 strikes per minute of output, which is like you don't usually see that type of deal in the UFC. But yeah, we're not gonna be able to see that here because Brian will probably be out wrestled for 3 rounds. That's just kind of unfortunate. So yeah, I see Gunnar. He's literally the kryptonite for Barberena here. I see Brian struggle with wrestlers in the past, and most of Brian's losses to come to submission or via decision from wrestlers, pretty much getting out wrestled for the whole fight. And that's pretty much how Gunnar wins. Gunnar out wrestles guys for the whole fight, or he gets a submission. And I totally see that happening here. So I expect Gunnar to probably wear out Brian over the 3 rounds. And I see maybe like a dominant decision or maybe like a 3rd round late submission. But yeah, I don't think Barberena has a chance here. It's just big fan of Barberena, but he doesn't match up here well at all. Now we have the co-main event of the evening. The 155-pound division is blessed for this fight. So we have number 3, Justin Gaethje, taking on number 6, Rafael Fiziev. So starting off with Gaethje, he's 23-4 with the kind of a weird record of 6-4 in the UFC, but he's only fought ranked guys. And 5 of those 6 losses come by knockout. So he is very much a kill or be killed fighter. I think, 19 of his 23 wins come by knockout too. So he just, most time if he's winning, he's probably flatlining you because he has such sheer knockout power. So he's coming off his second title challenge and second title challenge loss to Charles Oliveira, the former champ. And Gaethje's also the former intern champ when he had a 5th round KO over Tony Ferguson a few years back. Gaethje's 34 years old, so he's kind of exiting his prime. And he's 5'11 with a 70-inch reach, so he has good height for the division. And he's a college wrestler, former college wrestler at Northern Colorado, but he doesn't really use it at all to his expense. He pretty much is just a pure boxer. He's fallen in love with his boxing coach and pretty much just being a boxer, so he thrives off the chaos. He doesn't really use the wrestling that much anymore, but I mean, it's there, but I don't think he's going to use it in this fight. He'd probably benefit if he uses it in this fight, but he won't use it. He thrives. He looks for chaos. He loves chaos. And then we have Rafael Fiziev. Rafael Fiziev is 12-1. He's 6-1 in the UFC with 3 knockouts and then 3 decision wins. And he's come off his first main event win ever over Rafael dos Anjos, and he's the former champ of one of the lightweight division. So Fiziev is perfect for this matchup. He's 30 years old, so just entering his prime. He's 5'8 with a 71-inch reach. Now Fiziev has a really interesting story. He pretty much grew up very poor, but then got moved half across the world, become a Muay Thai kickboxer coach because he has great kickboxing in his background. So pretty much on top of him being a great kickboxer, he's also training some of the best stand-up MMA kickboxers in the world. So I think that's huge here. And Fiziev's, he thrives off of his elusiveness and his oppressive strike defense. I've never seen guys quite duck leg kicks the way he just bends his back. He's so flexible. But yeah, Fiziev's so impressive here. He's only 30 years old and he only has 1 loss, and that 1 loss is just a fluke knockout. And this fight's really interesting because it's the first old school fight versus new school fight. So with the lightweight division, I think it's probably the most popular division probably in the UFC for people who don't watch it. You have the Conor McGregor's, the Dustin Poirier's, Michael Chandler's, Tony Ferguson, Justin Gaethje in this fight. So these are kind of the old school guys that are kind of almost making their way out soon. And then you have a lot of new school guys, Mateusz Gamrot, current champ Islam Makhachev. You got Armin Sarukian, and then of course Rafael Fiziev in this fight. This is kind of the first fight between the old school and new school guys. I think the big problem the last 2 years in this division is that the old school guys are kind of holding up the division where they're all making up the top 5 of the division. And these guys that I mentioned, a lot of the Eastern Europeans that are kind of making their way up, they're like in like the 10 to 15 range of this division, but we're not seeing crossfire between these guys. We're seeing all the old school guys pretty much fight each other for the belt versus the new school guys kind of need to make their way up because they're probably honestly better than the old school guys at this point. So I think this is kind of the first time where you kind of see the torch pass where Gaethje might get knocked out here and Fiziev is the first new school guy is going to kind of overpass these guys. So yeah, I see this fight being Gaethje getting exposed technically. Gaethje is really impressive on the feet, but I just think him being a college wrestler and Fiziev having a enormous decade-long background plus of kickboxing, Muay Thai, which is and some of the best parts of the world in Thailand. I think that's just different levels to this. I see Gaethje because he loves chaos. I just see him underestimating Fiziev, and I just see him probably getting cracked early, honestly. But then there's also the fact that Gaethje's never been finished early, and all 10 of Gaethje's UFC fights, as 6-4, he has 10 fight bonuses. So that means that even when he's losing, he's pretty much putting on great performances. So I think he might not get finished early here, but it's really tough to tell. Fiziev could crack him early, but I could also see a scenario where maybe Gaethje wins the first round because Fiziev never fought someone quite this high level. And then Fiziev comes in the second, kind of starts dominating as the fight goes on. Maybe he wins the second, and then Fiziev gets a third round finish. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna go with a third round finish by Rafael Fiziev over Justin Gaethje. And I think this fight really lines up well to where maybe the winner gets a title shot. Maybe not Gaethje, but I think if Fiziev wins, he definitely could be in the consideration. If not, this is definitely maybe next in line after the winner of Dariush and Charles in May. Then we have the main event of the evening, the welterweight championship. We have current champion of the welterweight, Leon Edwards, and he's taking on number one contender Kamaru Usman. This is their third matchup. It still feels weird seeing Usman as a contender and not the champ, considering Usman was the champ for so long. So Edwards is 23-1, that one being a no contest, and he's 12-2-1 in the UFC. And Edwards he's on his best career streak right now. I'm pretty sure, it's best win streak. So he's come off his first title win in the UFC. And Edwards is 31 years old, so he's right in the middle of his prime. And he's 6'2" with a 74-inch reach. And Edwards is primarily a kickboxer coming out of London. But he has drastically improved his grappling since his last Usman fight. Or their first Usman fight, when they fought in 2015. And Edwards has been in the UFC since 2014, but he's vastly improved just everywhere in mixed martial arts since he's joined the UFC. So he was also the first to take Usman down in their last fight, which I think was huge. His wrestling and grappling definitely improved. That's right. Like, Usman's never been taken down ever in a UFC fight. He's never had his back touch the mat in, I believe, 16 UFC fights until his last fight. I just think that's impressive that professional wrestlers, professional boxer, whatever it is, they have not been able to take Usman down once, and the amount of minutes he's logged in that octagon, that's so impressive. So I think Edwards will probably use that as a threat here, considering also their last fight was at elevation. Probably get into that in a second, but we'll break down Usman here too. So Usman's 20-2, and he's 15-1 in the UFC, and he just lost his 19-fight win streak and a 15-fight UFC run. So apparently he started out 15-0 in the UFC and lost his last fight. So a very impressive run. I think he was only one fight short of tying Anderson Silva for the longest win streak in UFC history. So the big thing with Usman is he's almost 36 years old. It's very old for the division, and he's 6 foot with a 76-inch reach. And he's the teammate of Justin Gaethje in the last fight, and he's kind of in a similar situation where he was a college wrestler, but he kind of fell in love with his hands over time. So where he doesn't really use his wrestling as much, probably more than Gaethje, but he likes boxing more than wrestling, even though his background is wrestling, which is interesting. So Usman was previously, before his last fight, he was the pound for pound best fighter in the world. And he was a 6-time champion. He had 5 title defenses. So yeah, he was the best fighter in the world until the head kick KO with 1 minute left in the 5th round. That's just probably one of the craziest moments in UFC history. So yeah, as we know, last fight when these guys fought, Edwards won the first round, then got badly dominated for the next 3 rounds, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round, and probably the first half of the 5th round, and came down to the point where Leon Edwards needed a finish. And then he did the unthinkable and got the head kick KO with 1 minute left in the entire fight, where Usman was gonna definitely win. So I think that head kick, that KO, it's gonna have implications on Usman's future because he's never been KO'd before And the fact that he's never been KO'd and he's getting older, I think that kind of has some concern there. I worry about his chin going forward, just because I think how the UFC works pretty much is that there's these guys who have very durable chins who don't get knocked out, but the second they do get knocked out, it just spirals downhill from there. It's sad to think that like it's just from brain damage pretty much. So I think interesting stat I found is that fighters are 3-11 when they're fighting for their belt they just lost. So Usman here has to, he's gonna have to defy the odds and be the fourth person ever to get their belt back in an immediate title fight. And I think something else to worry here is that he's broken his hand in his last fight. I think just 2 months ago I saw him in a cast, and yet he's gonna fight now. I'm like, that's within 8 weeks of being in a cast. So he wasn't even working out full time less than 8 weeks ago. And we all know he's always had bad knees, which is concerning for his health in the future. And yeah, his first bad KO, I think win or lose here, he might actually retire. I think because he's talked about also winning at the top. So if he does get the belt back, I could see a scenario where he wins and it's all happy, where he retires. I don't think we've ever had a scenario where, other than Khabib Nurmagomedov, where a fighter is champion of the world or coming off of like an impressive win when they retire. Like usually the sport's really sad with retirements where a guy announces retirement and then gets knocked out in the next fight, because usually when you need to announce your retirement in the sport, it's probably too late and that your health's probably deteriorating. So considering Usman's health is probably deteriorating here, if he won the belt, he'd probably be very wise to retire at almost 36 with millions in his bank account as well for his daughter. So yeah, I think Edwards is going to win this fight. I think he lost the majority of minutes last fight, but it was because of the altitude, like I mentioned. I think they're not in Utah anymore, and they're in London without this altitude. And I think Usman obviously benefits hugely, massively from that altitude, because Usman trains in Colorado, which he trains at Team Elevation. So with Usman without that, we call it the altitude to his advantage, I think Edwards is going to greatly use that to his advantage here, and he's going to have a better cardio in the tank for the 5th round. Yeah, I think that because Edwards will have more in the tank as well, I think he'll be more competitive in the 3rd and 4th round versus some very unthinkable last minute knockout. I see Usman just wearing down as the fight goes on because he won't have the cardio to his advantage anymore. And I could maybe see like another like Edwards like late round stoppage. Just because his cardio will be better, I could totally see him getting another knockout. There's also the fact too that I could be totally wrong. Usman proves everyone like right, because everyone's kind of saying Usman will probably win this fight, win his belt back. I disagree, but there's probably the scenario where I see happening where Usman, he's scared of the last fight. He knows his durability isn't quite there anymore with his chin, with getting knocked out. So I think if Usman was smart, he'll probably try to wrestle more in this fight. But I just think Leon will just bait more more kill shots, more one-shot KOs, and I think he'll find it eventually, because Usman's been knocked out before, obviously, now. And yeah, that is UFC 285. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about March Madness for a couple minutes. So I'm not an expert all with college basketball, just putting that out there. I think like most of you guys, no one watches college basketball for the first 3-4 months of the season. Most people tune in when it's March Madness, because that's when that's when everyone makes a bracket and it's been a little more like worth watching. So I'll talk about my Final Four teams. I have number 1 over Alabama over number 5 Duke. And I have number 1 Houston over number 2 UCLA. I know those probably are pretty popular picks, but I think I saw a stat the other day that a 1 seed has made it 5 straight years in the March Madness finale. So just going off those stats, there's a good chance that it could be a 1-versus-1 in this scenario. And I'm gonna go with a 1-versus-1. It's gonna be Houston and Bama. It's gonna be the number 1, number 2 team in the entire tournament. Plus, they've barely even lost this year, and they probably look better than ever right now after their conference tournaments. And then, yeah, I think Duke's a little bit of a sleeper, I would say, just because they just won the ACC, and they kind of started off sluggish in the beginning of the year, from what I read in like November. But because I think it's because they have a lot of freshmen, so they kind of got rid of those issues as the freshmen kind of developed through the season. And the fact that Duke just won like the ACC tournament, which is a really impressive conference, I think they're waiting for a March Madness run. So I think they're definitely a sleeper here. Even though it's Duke, and I know everyone knows who Duke is, I think they're a sleeper for once. And then I also like Memphis as a sleeper. I think they win their 8-9 game. And then similar to last year, they gave Gonzaga a really tough run for their money. Gonzaga almost lost the second round when Gonzaga was a huge favorite in the entire tournament. So I think Memphis with Penny Hardaway as their coach, great coach by the way. I think Memphis goes on to that second round. And I think Purdue being a 1 seed, I think they're probably the weakest 1 seed. I never trust Purdue in March Madness. I think Purdue is I think they're a well-rounded team, but when you get late in the tournament, you need stars, you need guys who can create shots for themselves, score 20 points a night. I don't think Purdue usually has guys like that. They do have a decent big man who's like 7'3", but I think when you get later in the tournament, guys like that get shut down. So they're not gonna be able to dominate here with their big men as much. I think Memphis beats them with their guards and their shooting. So I think Memphis is definitely a sleeper here. Could get that wrong though. So don't take my word for it necessarily. I think with March Madness, you gotta learn, don't take it too serious because no one's bracket is gonna be perfect. So you just don't overthink it. And then my last sleeper of the tournament, I think I like Texas A&M. They just came in off of the SEC championship loss to Alabama, and like I said, I think I have Alabama losing the finale. So losing to Bama isn't really it's not an ugly loss. I think A&M has great upside. I think that they'll beat the 10 seed in the first round, and they get matched up with Texas in the second round. I think Texas they fired their coach this year, they're kind of in a weird swamp right now. I just think that I think A&M gets the 7-2 upset in the second round. So I like A&M in that spot. So yeah, I think my sleepers are Duke, the 5 seed, maybe going far to the Final Four. And then Memphis, the 8 seed, getting to like the Sweet 16 maybe. And then A&M over Texas. That's just a great second round matchup. And then my team to stay away from. Please stay away from Kansas, guys. Kansas is not a 1 seed this year. They might have won the championship last year, but they don't even have Bill Self right now. Bill Self is dealing with his own health issues right now. They don't have their coach. So they also don't have their 2 top scorers from last year's team. So it's not even the same team that won it last year. And the fact that I don't think no team has won back-to-back in over a decade. So I don't think Kansas is that team to win it back-to-back. I think they could win early potentially. I don't think that they're gonna necessarily lose like a 8 seed early. They might go to like a Sweet 16, but I don't see them going like the Final Four or Elite 8. They're not that team. So yeah, stay away from Kansas, guys. They're not really a true 1 seed this year. That's everything I have for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the UFC 285 this weekend and the March Madness the next 4 days and 3 weeks. Thanks for tuning in to Sports Takes with Dom. I'm Dominic Persinger for the Coug Radio.